Welcome to a different kind of doula. We are here again as we're so excited to have Bonnie Blachly here with us from the Gentle Passage Doula Collective. I'm Kathleen Putnam, and I'm here with my co-host Maureen Cures, and Colleen is away this week, and we have a new topic that is about dementia and sexuality. And so I'm just going to hand this over to you, Bonnie. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks for having me. I think this is a really important topic to talk about, especially with people with dementia. And part of it is because we never really find out that sexuality is a problem until someone reports that they're having bad behavior, quote, bad behavior. And when you really start to take a step back and look at what's really going on, I think that's where we start to realize what I hate to use the word poor, but what a poor job we do at really evaluating people and their needs in terms of their own sexuality and intimacy. So I thought maybe I would just, talk a little bit about that because one of the things, just in general, uh, for a person, whether you're living at home and you have dementia, but you're still being managed at home, or you go into a facility such as an assisted living, a memory care facility, or even a nursing home, nobody ever asks about your sexual health. It's not an area that people ask about. In fact, I don't ever remember even seeing it on an assessment form that I've used in any of my jobs. Have you, Maureen?
I would love to share this story. When I was a nurse in Boston, on our intake form was, "Are you sexually active?" And I was working in an cardiac ICU at the time. And so we all just crossed it out, wrote deferred or something because we just
Yeah.
crossed it. But our nurse manager, on when they went through for the accreditation, that was a big deal that we were not doing that. So we got dinged. And so she said, "You have to ask that." So one day there was a man, he was 75, and there I was, 20 something, and all embarrassed. And I'm going through, and then I'm like, "Well, are you, head down, are you sexually active?" And embarrassed to ask that question. I don't know why, but he's like, "Oh, not since I had my heart attack." And he just was sharing how he and his wife were so scared to be intimate that it could, could set off a heart attack. And talking to him through that, I realized I was young. I was like a 26-year-old nurse. And it made me realize that that is such an important part of someone's life. And I never skipped over that question again because of the interaction I had with that man. And we talked it through, and I got this, someone to come and speak with him and his wife, and I notified the doctor, but it was really a powerful moment for me.
Right. That's great. I'm glad to hear that you got it, that they put it on their forms.
Yeah,
But
and that was back in the like early 90s.
yeah,
But Bonnie, will you explain to us really sexuality and intimacy, sexuality and intimacy?
sure. When I want to kind of go back to, because when we first notice a problem, now my background, as you know, is long-term care. And so, people think, that their parents never had sex, for one thing. And so a lot of times the kids don't know what the parents' sexuality is, what their preferences are, and that sort of thing. So one of the things that we've really discovered is that generally, as people age, their desire for sex diminishes normally, but not everybody, but most people. But what they're really, really looking for is intimacy. And so when you think about when you use the word intimacy, a lot of people associate intimacy with sex, but there's more to intimacy than sex. And so there's all different kinds of intimacy, but most people jump to physical intimacy first. But there's also emotional intimacy, and there's intellectual intimacy, there's experiential intimacy, there's spiritual intimacy. And so when you throw those words out, what do people think of when you say that? And those kinds of intimacies can be with not just with your spouse, but there could be intellectual intimacy with a really good friend, um, or you can have intimate relationships even with people you don't like, support people that you're working with. You have to have this intimate connection, but it's not a sexual thing. And so really getting people to recognize that part that we need to be assessing people's preferences for intimacy, because a lot of times that's what this behavior is pointing us to, is that they're looking for intimacy, not necessarily to have a sexual relationship. So I just think that it's important that we put that on the table and get people to think about that.
Thank you so much. You're reminding me of men are from Mars and women are from Venus, because it
Mhm.
feels like that really threw it out there. Like intimacy for men is sex, for women, it's so many more things. And then also the idea I remember in working with people is just this idea of having a work wife, and just that risk of feeling vulnerable, of having somebody at work that takes care of these things. Um,
Mhm.
but one thing I was wondering, so how does this change with dementia? How does sex and intimacy change with dementia, and assessing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where we have to think about, and I think a lot of people have to rely on their physicians to say this, but it's really, you have to think about what part of the brain is being affected by dementia, because
Mhm.
that's going to determine what kind of behaviors you're going to see. And so a lot of times the behavior that you see is this really inappropriate behavior where, people will just start undressing in public, or they'll start making sexual innuendos, or they'll just blatantly yell out some kind of sexual thing that's totally inappropriate. And that's generally what they call frontotemporal dementia. And if you were to look at an actual brain, you would see a shrinkage in that area with someone who has dementia, particularly Alzheimer's, but in other dementias as well. And so again, if we know kind of where it's coming from, then we can sort of think of strategies to deal with it, to deal with the issues. But some of the behavior, if you think about it, can be really obvious. Like, for example, the woman who steps out of her room if she's in assisted living or a nursing home or an adult family home and she has no clothes on. Why does she have no clothes on? Is it It's not necessarily that she's looking for sex, but that she's too hot. Maybe the room is too hot. You have to look at the environment. Now, if she's running off and trying to get into bed with someone, maybe what she's looking for is that person to person connection. So, what can you do? I mean, I always thought, put one of those really long pillows in bed with them. It's like something they can hug and hold on to. Sometimes, it's just that they want to be next to someone,
Yeah.
and or maybe the clothes that they're wearing is rough and their skin and it's just uncomfortable. And there's some people that are what we call nude sleepers. They just don't wear clothes to bed. And that's their norm. And so we have to try to figure that out. Maybe it's that they have to go to the bathroom. It's we've got to look at the obvious things.
This is so powerful because you don't really think of all those little innuendos
Right. Yeah.
and that someone steps out, and it could be the medication they're on is so looking at everything. How do you think, as either doulas or as part of the care team, we would be able to assess that? I mean, yeah, that's something that we should all know to look deeper than what's on the surface.
Right. Well, I'll tell you right up front, there's very little training given to caregivers about this topic. And that's where I think it starts, is that we have to do more training with people to help them understand and maybe even give them examples of behavior or case studies that we have used or seen or experienced ourselves that can help cue them to how they're going to deal with some of these situations. Because some of the times what we do as caregivers is we exacerbate the situation by our behavior.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we have to know how to calm somebody down, how to get them to go and put their clothes on. And maybe if they don't want to wear a nightgown or pajamas, put them in their regular clothes and see if they're pulling their clothes off still. So I think we have to learn to work outside the box, so to speak, because we have these routines, and so many dementia clients get labeled as bad apples, so to speak, because of these behaviors when we haven't really done a very good assessment on what their sexuality was when they didn't have dementia. Did they have preferences? Have they had conversations about what they want or don't want? And so I think those are all things that we have to do. So I think we really need to develop some training for caregivers on this issue because they're going to run up against it for sure, and how they deal with it too. Especially if you're providing care for someone and they're grabbing at you and um, trying to rub themselves up against you. How do you deal with that? And how can we not only deal with it, but really get to the core of why it's happening so that we're not really labeling people as these sort of weird, sex fiends or whatever. Or I don't want to care for that person because this is what they do. So we just have to look for strategies. And I'll tell you, the person who does a lot of really good videos on this is Tifa Snow, and she puts videos out all the time, and she's got some on sexuality and intimacy and dementia, and they're really good. So I think if you're working with anybody and you're not sure, because I'm telling you, the education that's out there is not real good right now. So it's something that we probably need to develop to kind of help people along that way. But throwing the concept of the disease of dementia on top of these issues even exacerbates it, and then it gets really difficult. And so very often residents are asked to move or leave that agency, and I don't think that's really what we want to do. We want to deal with the issue. But there are times, I mean, I've seen it, and maybe you guys have too, when, you have someone who all they really want is to be hugged or their hand held or their arm around them. And maybe it's a man and a woman in a facility, and one is married and one isn't. And the married spouse comes in and they're upset about what they're seeing,
Sure.
and if you can't, they have a hard time understanding that they're not really having a sexual relationship, they just are looking for comfort. And they get upset. And I've seen it where they've actually moved their spouse out because they were so upset by the situation. And so we have to do more education too with families and help them to understand that this is not about their relationship. It's just about the need for um, touch. And touch is the big one, I think.
Yeah. You're making me think that just like with death and dying, sex and intimacy is not something people are willing and open to discuss. And I'm wondering, I think about assessments I've had, my parents have had, people who have been sick. how often the assessment includes a real understanding around intimacy before you're diagnosed.
Hmm.
So, it's another thing. A lot of times we see people after they need problems. That's how our system is set up. So, what needs to happen around that?
Well, I got a really great tip from somebody about that, and I thought I would share that with you,
Right. Oh,
which is you should make it part of your advance directives. And you should put in your advance directives what kinds of things you think you would like. Should you get dementia or not, be able to state what you want. Put it in your advance directive now. These are the things I like. I like when my husband puts his arm around me, or when he rubs my neck or my shoulders, or he holds my hand, or I want someone to rub my feet. Those are all really intimate things that you may enjoy, and you probably would enjoy in if you develop dementia. And I think if it could be a piece in the advanced directives that people create, it could go a long way in when a person gets admitted into a facility to kind of um, alleviate some of that reaching out that people do for this kinds of behavior that they can't articulate. So
yeah.
I think that's one to me that was like a light went on in my head when I read that. I thought, "Oh my gosh, I never even thought about that." So I think it's something we should add to our advanced directives, because we do a lot of work in advanced directives. Maureen, what about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking that we ask people, what do you want in your room? What smells? How do you like, do you want your feet rubbed, this or that, but not how to be intimate with their partner or
Right.
with their family members or
Yeah.
um, with those that matter to them. And that's such a great thing because people become afraid to be physical, to touch people. They become afraid to touch their loved ones as they're dying, and
Right.
so with dementia, it's the same. I just think that's such a great thing to add that intimacy piece to our
Yeah.
advanced directives.
Yeah. So that's the main thing for me. You know, what we try to do, I think, is ask families, what was their life like? What are the things they enjoy without saying what sort of intimate things did they like? I know we used to do an all about me document in the facility that I was at that was devoted to people with dementia. And but it never got to all about me in terms of my sexual behavior. However, I think, tools like that. I mean, I'm sure there are assessment tools for sexual relationships out there. And I think it would be good to explore those and get those implemented with the people that you're working with, because it's a really important part of our life, and it just gets ignored. And so I think it's really important that we start talking about it and try not to be embarrassed about it. And I would just add one other thing here, too, is that a lot of times people are referred to a doctor or a counselor, especially if they feel like, things aren't going well in their sex life because of the dementia. And you have to be really careful about who you're going to because you really need somebody that's skilled in this area. It's not just any counselor or any doctor, because a lot of times when you bring it up, they change the subject. So if they're changing the subject, you're probably not with the right person. So I think if you're looking for help, you need to look to someone who's expert in this area. And so, yeah, and Kathleen, I don't know if you have any connections with that or have any thoughts about that?
Well, I have to say that I have a really heavy heart when we're talking about this for both my dad and my mother-in-law. So my mother-in-law, and it just breaks my heart, was like sneaking out of her room and into another gentleman's room to be with somebody. And she just wanted to be held, and the
Mhm.
only way that that could happen is if she snuck out. And then I just think about the isolation that happened with COVID and her being locked in a room and she couldn't even come out hallway.
Yeah.
And she was somebody who always had pets, and she couldn't have pets, and just always had something on her lap. She had a bird on her shoulder much of the time that I saw her. She had two cats. She usually had two dogs in her house. And I think that touch is so important.
Mhm.
And that lonesomeness and lack of connection and feeling loved, heard, and understood and cared about. And then with my dad, I remember it was tremendously embarrassing, with his what we all thought were sexual advances and inappropriate behavior, even with my own daughter, things that he would say.
Mhm.
I do think that a core thing here is to educate families and to normalize this, and what to expect and how it might unfold. And then
Mhm.
my last thought is just like how things change over time. Like what I like and how my body responds since menopause is completely different.
Yeah,
About,
exactly.
when you're hot, or when you're like, your tolerance for certain things. Like my sister said, I don't know if you should ever get a pedicure again, Kathleen. You look like you're gonna jump out of your skin. So it's like the other thing of like reading the room and trusting the staff, and trusting the people around. Like, this person seems to really respond to this, because we know we change over time. And
Right.
guessing with dementia, that would be true too, especially with capability.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One thing I think is that we have to educate the families that it's okay to change doctors if their doctors shy away from these important topics, because so many people think, oh no, I've been going to my doctor for years. But if they won't address these really important topics, it might not be the best fit for them at this phase of their lives. But people are so connected. And I remember when my dad was sick and even dying, my mom's like, oh no, well, he's the doctor, he knows all. But I said, but he won't talk about these certain things. But
Mhm.
that it's okay for us to educate that if you're not getting your needs met, find someone that will meet your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I know when my mother died, my dad was really lonely after that. And I still remember him. He went to the doctor and got some Viagra. And I'm thinking, what are you going to do with this Viagra? Do you know someone that? And so um, we've always had a little bit of joke about that, but he really was looking for intimacy, and he
Mhm.
did find some other women his age who also was looking for the same thing. And I don't know the extent of their relationships, but it was really important for him to have those relationships. And I think one of the things that families try to do is they try to fill the gap when one of their parents dies for the other parent, and it really doesn't work. I could be my dad's best daughter, but I can't be a spouse. And so, really, I was promoting those relationships for my dad. I say, hey, yeah, he moved into a new neighborhood. The woman behind him was a widow, and they struck up a great relationship, and they did a lot of things together. And I think that was important. But I do think they would cuddle on the couch, and I had no problem with that. I think it was good, but some of my other siblings did have a problem with it. So he finally sat everybody down and said, "Look, I'm not looking to get married again. I just want some companionship." So, I mean, that's so we have to kind of respect that and figure out where people are, not only without dementia, but with dementia, So I think so many times I've seen couples get together on the couch in a common area on a memory care unit. They're not married, but they're just enjoying that physical connection. And I think it's really important that we allow it, and we're not trying to separate people, because it's part of their plan. And the other thing too is it has to be part of a care plan when you're in an agency. So uh, and how many care plans do you see that have a problem on them about sexuality? None, there's nothing that addresses it. And so we have to really help people and help organizations to really think of normalizing this.
Well,
I love that you're bringing this up. I think that one thing that comes to mind that also just seems like something that's important, that is about intimacy, not sexual intimacy, but is children.
Mhm.
Is bringing in young children who don't have that apprehensiveness that you see adults do when dementia is involved, and climbing up on the lap and putting their arms around him and hugging him and kissing him, and just how important. uh I noticed that with I noticed it with my mom living alone now too, as well as my dad and my mother-in-law. Just that, just that full-on hug of, again, it's human connection and just ability to feel love. And we know with the nervous system, it's required to self-regulate. You can actually have a huge impact on the allostatic load in somebody to bring the stress down when you touch them.
Yeah, there's so many benefits of touch, and I think that's why too a lot of older people get dogs or
Yeah.
cats. It's that petting. It's a human touch thing with an animal can also help. But yeah, it's so important. It's really an important topic. So hopefully
yeah.
people will think about it.
But I think, one of the things you touched on was your mom had already died, but your dad needed that physical intimacy, that touch and companionship. And oftentimes with dementia, the spouse that does not have dementia, that is cognitively, alert, they need that too. And a friend of mine, her father had buried 2 wives, and his 3rd wife ended up with dementia. And he moved into the, assisted living community with her, but she ended up having to go to memory care. Well, my friend was so upset that he ended up with a girlfriend, even though he'd go up his wife had no idea who he was, but he needed that connection, that companionship, and to educate the families that it's not just the person with the diagnosis of dementia or a life limiting diagnosis, but it's also the spouse left behind, or the spouse there while their spouses they knew them is long gone. It was very hard because my friend was very Catholic, and yeah, she's like, Dad, you're still married. So I kept saying it's companionship.
Yeah, and a lot of times people that have dementia too can still have a sexual relationship with their spouse.
Yes.
I just think that they have to be sensitive to when it's no longer possible. But
Right.
uh, it's not a one and done thing.
Right. Well, this has been such a great topic. So, Bonnie, thank you for coming and speaking to us about this and sharing your knowledge. So, Bonnie is part of our Gentle Passage Doula Collective, as Kathleen said at the beginning of our talk. But with the Gentle Passage Doula Collective, we offer monthly death cafes the second Friday of every month at 12:30 Pacific time. And that's a way you can come and you can ask questions. There's no set agenda. It's just whoever shows up. It's a virtual event, and you can find it on our website at gentlepassagedoulacollective.com and go to the events page. But it's a place to come, and you can ask questions about anything. You can ask questions about intimacy and dementia, because it is something facing end of life. We also we offer a doula training program. So we are um, have 2 fall programs it's starting in just a few weeks, our virtual end of life doula training program, that is over the course of 8 weeks, starting September 13th, 2 hours every Wednesday evening. And then we also have our in-person training here in the Pacific Northwest the last weekend of October. So we would love to have you take a look at our website on the events page there too. There's information, and we do have some informational webinars about what to expect during our doula training that are coming up early in September. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having another rousing topic next week. So, Kathleen, anything else that you think we should add?
No, just if you have any topics or you're interested in being a guest on our show, please reach out to us at gentlepassagedoulacollective.com and contact us that way, or you can go to Challenging Conversations on our Facebook page.
Great.
And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks, Bonnie.
You're welcome.